So Andrew, knowing how important supplementation is and nootropics with regards to mind health and brain health, obviously you've got your favorites. So possibly give us your top 5 with regards to what people can do to improve their mental health and performance.
Yeah, so I think that in general, when it comes to supplementation, you can think of some different categories where there's some things that might be useful to take daily, but in general, I don't have a sort of broad rule of thumb beyond a couple of the ones that I find most important for humans in general, which include things like magnesium and omega-3 fatty acids. And these days I'm excited about a brand new omega-3 coming out that has choline bound to it, which will help it get into the brain and the eyes quite a bit more for anti-aging and pro-brain recovery and injury and aging and things. But in general, for the nootropics, I would start to look at, not much between ages 25 and 50. But outside of that, as you start getting north of 50, things like the cholinergics, CDP choline, which helps speed up processing and helps with myelin health, that might become more important. And also, of course, the dietary aspects of protein as you're absorbing less protein as you hit 50, 60 or so, and the need for protein to trip mTOR to cause this progressive response of the system to do muscle protein synthesis. But I think the idea of biohacking with nootropics, there are a few that make some sense, but once you start thinking of why you're using them, then it becomes almost as important to do the skeletal load-bearing exercises and the protein and the sleep hacking. And those actually, I think, float to the surface, a priority list above most nootropics, unless you're trying to specifically address certain goals. There's certain nootropics you might want if you're getting better performance in sport, if your sport allows, those things in the sport. Or, I know both scientific presenters and salespeople that use vasopressin as a nootropic, inhaled vasopressin, because it's a neuropeptide that causes a nootropic effect briefly. I also know people that use it for hemophilia because it helps you not bleed too much when you just gotten bruised. But other people get that version of it for nootropics. That's not a strict nootropic, of course. Vasopressin is also called antidiuretic hormone in the body. So if you take vasopressin, you tend to get bloated and retain water. So again, not a true nootropic, and this gets to the idea that you probably shouldn't tolerate side effects when manipulating your brain with research chemicals and peptides and things, unless you really have deep suffering and you're trying to find anything that works and nothing is working. Maybe then navigate some risk. But otherwise, I would say when you're decent performer to good performer, only look for the small things that are innocuous in terms of impact negatively, but may have some upside. And that really is why I end up with magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D3, as kind of a nice, base. And then maybe with aging, some CDP choline, or maybe some other forms of choline, depending. And then when you're very young, you have to also think about omega-3s being more important as well. But when it comes to omega-3s, I want people to also be a little bit careful because you shouldn't ramp them up rapidly. One is many of the sources on shelves are rancid, so the sourcing is kind of key. And two, it's a solvent, fat's a solvent. So you can create bleeds pretty easily if you ramp up too fast before you're used to it. So it can be a risky thing. It's not just a pro-health molecule if you overdo it before you're used to it. So those are the sort of nootropic things or the supplement things. In terms of actual nootropics, true nootropics, I'm still a big fan of just the basic compound of like paracetam and a choline source like CDP choline. But again, I don't do it every day or even most days these days. I sort of dialed in the things that I would get from paracetam, I've dialed in more permanently and don't really need them. But, my mom takes paracetam and CDP choline somewhat routinely because she's in her mid-70s and she wants to continue to travel the world and be sharp. And so she takes nootropics to offset slight speed of processing and slight aging stuff, but also really to be pro-health. And that's how I would consider nootropics. They're not necessarily going to jack you up to 11. All due respect to Dave Asprey, you do not have a deficit of modafinil in your system. I promise you. It's not a thing. And some of those drugs, especially things like modafinil, they are not nootropics. There's some significant side effects monkeying with your histamine. I ended up in the hospital. This is one of my own, don't monkey with nootropics if you don't need to. I took modafinil for ostensibly for off-label for executive function reasons. And within 2 weeks of it, was in the hospital with head to toe hives, risking like major histamine problems, and took several days to get over it because my system hyperreacted to the histamine, the orexin suppression. So, I was taking it for a reason, prescribed for executive function off label, but I didn't need it for that. I just, thought I did because I was in the middle of my dissertation and looking for anything to help. Yeah. Before I went back into neurofeedback, practically, I should have just, poor grad student, I had lots of research tools, but I didn't have lots of personal training equipment at that point.